Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Today's show is one of the best of Point of View.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. In the first hour, we're going to be talking about a very difficult but very important topic, and that is sexual trafficking. I might just mention, those of you that might have young ears, you might want to at least have a parental advisory, because we're going to get into a topic we've addressed a number of times before, and I think you are going to really appreciate this book that we'll be talking about. It'll give you a lot more information so that you can be more prepared to make a difference in your community. We're privileged to have in studio with us today Alisa Jordheim, and she is the founding director of the Justice Society. It is an organization that really develops preventative and restorative enterprises for exploited and trafficked communities. She really has a passion for justice, spent many years, actually, interesting enough, in the airline industry, but now has really gone to some very dark places and has written an outstanding book, which we want you to know more about, and we are going to send you to her website to find out more about it and even get a discount on that book. Made in the USA, The Sex Trafficking of America's Children. Alisa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby. Pleasure to be here.
We have also, I might just mention, posted a very good video of you, some information about a book, as well as a link to your website, justicesociety.org. And I might just say at the outset that if people use the coupon code, they can get the book for a discount. Isn't that true?
That's right.
We'll talk more about that in just a minute, but I guess we need to just talk about this idea of sexual trafficking. And I can think Alisa is a good example. When we first talked about this many, many years ago, I think at that time we had Congresswoman Linda Smith on.
Oh, yes.
And we were at that time talking about what happened overseas, and a lot of people had their eyes open. But I remember that the first time we did a program on sexual trafficking in America, and we were maybe focusing on what happens around a Super Bowl or other things, I had people calling in saying, this can't be a problem here in the United States because the mainstream media is not talking about this. Nobody's talking about this. And yet, of course, you're talking about sex trafficking of America's children. Explain, if you might.
Well, actually, Kerby, Linda Smith and Shared Hope do a lot of work, a lot of wonderful work, and they are dealing domestically now as well.
Yes.
So there's a little transition there.
And that's something.
But this is a significant issue here in the United States. And I think that a good example to give you is just recently in June, we had Operation Cross Country number 8. 218
Yes.
children were rescued. 168 children and 218 pimps. And so now we are starting to hear about this in the media. And I even have friends now who'll say, wow, I am hearing more about American children. But there are so many factors and drivers I think we'll talk about a little later in the interview to talk about the high risk of our homeless children, our vulnerable children who are fatherless. We know that there's certainly a decline in society with that. And gangs are really moving up in this statistically. And so when we're talking about I just have a statistic here. 3,000 kids from the Dallas Independent School District are homeless now. Mm-hmm. If you talk about just that statistic and how quickly they're vulnerable on the streets, 100,000 kids in the U.S. a year are vulnerable to this. So I think we'll go more into statistics later on, but it is an issue for our American children because the vulnerability is so high.
One of the things I appreciate about your book is, first of all, you're a very good storyteller, so you tell a lot of stories, but you also give us a lot of facts and figures, because a lot of people say, well, how big is it? Okay, you can tell me one story, and that's an anecdote. But then just the statistic, again, that I remember, that a young person that is a runaway, their likelihood of being approached sexually and maybe even being drugged into sexual trafficking is, I think, just staggering. And it illustrates, again, why this is a problem that is on the rise, and it's something we should pay attention to. And that's obviously why you put together the Justice Society and wrote this book.
Yes, that's correct. And you're talking about homeless children. Within 48 hours, statistically, Kerby, 1 in 3 will be solicited for sexual exploitation. And if we're talking about 3,000 children in Dallas County alone, from Dallas Independent School District, that are homeless, that's 1,000 that are going to be solicited for commercial sex when we're talking about the homeless population.
We've got lots to talk about today. We're going to talk about why it is on the increase. We're going to talk about the different ways in which people are solicited, young people. And oftentimes, interestingly enough, it tends to be somebody that they know. I think we're wise in telling our children not to go with a stranger, but we also have to tell them that even some people that they know could be a problem. And also what fuels this, things like pornography and the rest. So there's a lot to talk about. But just before we do a little more detail in your book, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about the Justice Society, because I hope that people will go to the website, learn a little bit more about how they can participate in what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, Justice Society, we established it about 3 years ago, but I've been working in this arena about 6, and working specifically with survivors, doing advocacy work. We do a lot of advocacy in the court systems, even developed a program where we bring teams in along with the district attorney's office to support these kids giving testimony. We bring awareness, and that's predominantly why I wrote the book. And I will tell you, I wrote this book on what I believe to be a mandate from the Lord, because I said we don't need one more book on sex trafficking.
Yeah.
Right. And it kept coming back and back. So I finally wrote it. I think it's a huge awareness piece. So advocacy, awareness, and then social business is something we're really moving toward, particularly internationally, but some domestic as well. Creating social business opportunities for really high risk and trafficked populations, even red light districts, so that people have opportunities outside of, poverty and sexual exploitation.
Noel Boucher's been on this program too with Pure Hope, and he said, when I was in law school, I thought maybe I would get a law degree so I could pursue sexual trafficking overseas, and then I came to realize the problem is here, and so it is something we need to pay attention to. But just before we take our first break, I'd love to have you share just briefly how you got involved in this way, because a lot of people say, well, you're just very successful. People that see your video or watch right now online will say, well, you don't look like the kind of person that would be going into some of these dark places and traveling to very difficult and threatening places around the country and around the world. How did you kind of end up in this particular endeavor?
Well, that's an interesting story. And it started about 7 years ago when my husband and I were on vacation. And as you mentioned, I'd been in the airline industry for 16 years. I've been all over the world, but not doing this kind of work, not really doing advocacy work, but I've seen a lot. So not much surprises me. But it was about 7 years ago, and this issue really wasn't on our radar, certainly not on my radar. I knew it existed, but wasn't there. And I was taking a walk on my husband's family farm, which I love to do each morning just by myself, my quiet time. And I had a significant visitation. And in this time, I began to see imagery cross my mind. And one was a ship come into port with slaves in it. And the other then moved on to a small child chained to a bed. Now, mind you, this wasn't on my radar. And as this began to unfold, these images, I began to weep just uncontrollably, and came to a point that when it finished, and I'm standing in the middle of this dirt road, literally with crops on both sides, all by myself. And I said, Lord, what are you telling me? And he was silent. And Kerby, he was silent for about 1.5 years. And so what I want to say is at that time I was marked, but I didn't know what to do with it. And that's probably like many people on this that'll be hearing this will say, this is really touching my heart, but I don't know what to do. So I continued to pray periodically, kept it until it began to come off the shelf, is what I say, and my heart began to stir again. I found a local organization that was doing anti-trafficking work, and I said, can I stuff envelopes for you?
But you've developed a lot more since then.
Since then, yes.
Let's take a break, and we will come back and give you a chance to learn a little bit more about this book, Made in the USA, The Sex Trafficking of America's Children. Also want to connect you up with the Justice Society. We'll talk more about some of the resources that are there. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Abdul Fattah al-Sisi is a Muslim and president of Egypt. He grew up in the midst of the Muslim world and in the world's center of Sharia scholarship. So when he called for a religious revolution within Islam, his words had great significance. In a speech at Cairo's premier center of religious learning, he called for a change and revolution. He argued that Islam is in need of a religious revolution. You imams are responsible before Allah. The entire world is waiting on you. The entire world is waiting on your word because the Islamic world is being torn. It is being destroyed. It is being lost. He went on to add, we need a revolution of the self, a revolution of consciousness and ethics to rebuild the Egyptian person, a person that our country will need in the near future. Columnist George Will lauded al-Sisi for his bravery. He said that as the head of the Egyptian state, al-Sisi occupies an office once occupied by Anwar Sadat, who was murdered by Islamic extremists for his opening to Israel. This was an act of tremendous bravery by al-Sisi, and if the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is looking for someone who plausibly deserves it, they could start here. President al-Sisi is right that Islam is in need of a religious revolution, but it is hard to see how that will happen in the Muslim world where more and more Arab countries are run by, or else threatened by, radical elements within Islam. And it's hard to see how Europe and America will help when the leaders of most of these countries are afraid to even talk about radical Muslim terrorism. You know, President al-Sisi is now calling for other Arab countries to join forces to battle ISIS. On a recent televised speech, he said the need for a unified Arab force is growing and becoming more pressing every day. He is one Arab leader who understands the problem within Islam and is calling for other Muslims to join together and fight ISIS. He deserves our support. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Topic today is sexual trafficking, and again, I'll give you that parental advisory, but we're going to get into some things perhaps you've never heard before, and I hope you need to maybe focus some time and attention, certainly your prayer life, but even maybe your sweat equity, your time, your treasure, your talent in dealing with this issue. We're going to give you some action items for you before the end of the broadcast. Alisa with us today as we are talking about her book, Made in the USA, The Sex Trafficking of America's Children. Alisa, okay, let's get into it. Some people have got to be thinking, how is it that these girls and even sometimes boys get caught up in this? You have early on a series of stories in the chapter about the lover boy syndrome. Explain that, because it is probably surprising to most people that most individuals who end up in the trafficking industry, with the exception of those who are kidnapped, in most other cases, they know the individuals that are enticing them into sexual trafficking. True?
That's true. There is a component of recruitment. It's called recruitment in most, it's high significant, over the 90 percentile that have some kind of a recruitment element. But the lover boy syndrome is very unique. And I would say, and I've asked a number of people who are experts in this area, because there aren't numbers out there telling us exactly how many are this lover boy syndrome, but I'd say probably 80 to almost 90% look like lover
and
boy.
I would not have known that until I read your book.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, people still think, Kerby, that kids are being kidnapped outside, in their windows and all
Grabbed,
that. And that's not typically what it looks like. So lover boy is someone who would be called a finesse pimp. Mm-hmm. Two types of pimps: a gorilla pimp, a guy who beats his girls, and a finesse pimp, one who psychologically manipulates his girls and his women. And that's what happens. These guys are masters at manipulation. And what they're doing is they are looking for vulnerable young girls, typically between the ages of 12 and 14. And I don't know if you remember, you probably have grandkids maybe that age and children that age. You're very vulnerable at 12. So they're looking for girls that they can easily target and mark, establish a relationship with, which might be a 6-day relationship. It might be 6 months relationship in what is it that she needs. So this lover boy will target someone who's either a loner. It could be in a mall. This is even how they operate. They'll look in a mall, see a couple young girls and walk up and say to a girl, well, you're cute. And they will watch how the child responds. If she gives him direct eye contact or responds, thank you, or anything to that regard, she's too much trouble for him. She looks down, says, oh, I'm not so cute. Just any kind of factor like that, easy mark. That's what he says, easy mark. So he moves in as the lover boy. He moves in and finds out who she is. In the story here about Tiana that we have, she sits down with this gentleman. I use that term really loosely. She sits down with him over coffee, and he proceeds to ask her all about her life. Tell me what's going on with you. So she tells him that she's having trouble with her mother, that she's couch surfing. She really doesn't have a place to stay. So she gives him all her private details.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, right. Well, you're 12 to 16 years old. You're certainly going to do this with, if it's an older guy or a cute guy or whatever the case may be, anybody that's even interested in you. So that's what he does, is he listens. So he listens very well. He finds out what she needs. Does she need a father figure? Does she need a boyfriend? Does she just need some money? Does she need a place to stay? And he is going to interject himself into her life to meet that need. She becomes dependent upon him, either physically to have her needs met, her true needs, food, shelter, that kind of thing, or just psychological needs. And then once that happens, it builds. These are young, vulnerable kids. Their frontal lobes haven't even fully developed,
That's
right?
Right.
And she becomes traumatically bonded, which is a term we use in here, but she becomes bonded to this gentleman. And I've heard one law enforcement officer told me within 6 weeks, it can be sooner, but typically if a girl's been with a guy 6 weeks, it's very hard to get her to actually recognize, one, she's been victimized, and two, that she really needs to leave unless she's really being physically abused to the point that she wants to leave.
Again, I love the story about this one girl walking down the street, recognizes that she's kind of discouraged, finds out she's had an argument with her mother, said, well, let me go give you a pedicure, and all of a sudden they move in, and then eventually, and it's not necessarily within the first day, week, or even month, then says, to pay the bills, I really need you to go be with some of these men. And because she wants to please him, she does so. And so this is such a different paradigm than the typical one that I think when you say sexual trafficking, we, of course, have heard the stories of those that are brought here to this country from China, from India, or from Russia, or whatever, and then sold into the sex trade. But you're talking about a very high percentage that instead just are easily manipulated by individuals who, I think you talk about in the book, eat, sleep, drink, all the ways in which they can think about how they can manipulate young people.
Yes.
Young girls in particular. Yeah. And so again, that I think is a warning sign for parents to recognize that as much as we have certainly, I think, wisely told our children not to go with strangers, we also somewhere need to also say that a person that's a little too charming, a little too involved in your life can really bring danger to you as well.
Absolutely. I received an interesting text 2 days ago from a friend of mine who I gave a copy of the book. She read it, and she has a 16-year-old daughter. And she texted me and said, I finally let my daughter read one of the stories. Where she was, concerned, was she ready to do it? Let's read one of the stories. And her daughter's response back to her as she set the book down, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, Mama, thank you for being overprotective of sister and I. She said, I really love you. Thank you. And that just touched my heart, because that's what we need. We need an awareness for our young girls that are so vulnerable.
Very good. Made in the USA, the sex trafficking of America's children. Alisa is with us today, and if you'd like to join us a little bit later, we'll open up the phones. But want to do, before we get to the break, talk about another category, what you call familial trafficking. And that is one that maybe we would know a little bit more about. But again, you have some nuances there that, again, would be new to many of our listening audience.
Yes, I really believe that that's on the rise, that we're seeing more of this. The young children, what happens a lot of times is parents might already be, a mother or aunt might already be in prostitution to some degree.
Right.
And that's one of the small stories we have in here, kind of a snippet. And so the child felt relatively safe with all these men coming in until one day her mother started having the kids go into her room instead. Right. And so what does a child do? How do they leave, first off? Right. They're usually very committed to their parents and will do what they need, as well as they're concerned that if they don't continue to service, if you will, or do what their parent is requiring, that a younger sibling might be the one who's taken in that place. So there's just so much money to be made in trafficking when we're talking about just this. You even rent. Some parents are giving their children. We have one story in the book where one mother owed a $200 debt. And so she sold her 5-year-old daughter to a gentleman to pay off this debt. And the child was found within a week, suffocated and murdered in a field. And she was just convicted of that. But familial trafficking is horrific. I found, in fact, that to be the hardest story to write.
I would imagine.
Yep.
Well, and the other one, that sort of leads into the other one, and that is survival sex. I mean, you just already alluded to that. If you are homeless, if you are a runaway, or if your family just simply has no financial means and you recognize, and maybe it starts out somewhat innocently, I mean, use that with quotes, that you bring in someone to maybe be the sugar daddy, but pretty quickly you end up in prostitution. That survival sex is another whole chapter that you talk about as well.
That's right. And there's something in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and that initially was established in 2000, but was reallocated in 2013. And they put a clause in there even about sex tourism, which is a facet of individuals, men and women, who will travel to different nations, including the United States, for the specific purpose of having sex with children or having commercial sex. And so this young man who gives his testimony of survival sex, he was homeless, living on the streets, and he would partner with this other young man who would frequently have sex and bring money in for them. And he had said, Rich in the story had said, I'm not going to do that. That's not something I will condone. I won't be a part of that. Until one day he was offered some money to do it. They needed money. They're living on the street. How do you eat? How do you sleep? You typically get your food out of garbage bins, right? And you sleep under bridges, whatever you need to do. And you begin to realize, okay, if I do want a meal, if I do want to do something, there are some things I'm going to have to do. One young man even said, I use this quote, became as easy as buying a burger. Having sex became as easy as going in and buying a burger because they have their basic needs met. So when Rich was first actually solicited, the gentleman said, no sex. He just had a fetish of some kind, but it wasn't for sex. So he took that first step of then going with this gentleman and meeting his needs, which was not actually sexual activity, but it was certainly sexual exploitation of some degree. And then so step by step by step, all those barriers get broken down, and then you find yourself doing whatever you need to do to survive on the street.
Just some examples of recruitment we're talking about today and the incremental steps that sometimes individuals take. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we want to give you a chance to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. If you've always had a question or two about sexual trafficking, maybe you have a story or an experience that you'd like to share, you can remain anonymous, but we're going to continue talking about some other aspects of this as well. Also talking about what fuels it. Why is it that there is such a demand for sexual trafficking in America?
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Alisa Jordheim with us as we are talking about her book, Made in the USA, The Sex Trafficking of America's Children. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You can remain anonymous, but let's, if we can, go to, I think it's Lana in Texas, KJRT. Thank you for calling today.
Hello?
Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, this is Lana from Amarillo, Texas. And I was sharing with the lady that answered the phone about my experience. When I was 19, I got raped, and then I ended up marrying the old boy and had 2 kids by him. Then he left me for another woman, and I was a single parent with 2 little girls, 3 and 4 years old. And I started drinking and going to the bars, and these men thought they were picking me up, but I was picking them up because I knew they'd buy my booze, and they'd give me money, you know, and they'd take care of me. And I even ended up marrying one old boy that everybody told me he was the town drunk, but I married him anyhow, and had domestic violence and all that kind of stuff. But then I ended up picking up married men, and they were my sugar daddies, and they took care of me. I mean, they took me places, did things, I mean, flew me all over the country. I was a high-class call girl, I thought. But, you know, it ended up that alcohol and drug addiction just nearly killed me.
Wow. Let me jump in real quickly because I wanted to get some comments. Just it sounds somewhat familiar to some of the things you've been talking about.
It sure does. And Lana, thank you for sharing that, because what we see in your story is that initially you were victimized. I mean, you were raped and you were taken advantage of, and then progressively it became a part where you were somewhat complicit in that. To your own admission is that you recognize what you were doing, and that's very much what it looks like for these kids. There's an initial victimization, but often many of them will return into even recruiters and recruiting other children themselves. So thank you for being transparent, Lana, on that. That's very real.
You know, in your chapter there on survival sex, again, the average listener can't even imagine that. But if you're out on the streets, where some of them are, or even in a situation here where you marry the person that victimized you, you get into, well, I've got to do something to survive. And here she gave a good example of, I was sort of like a high-priced car girl, but of course there's a devastation on the other end of that. And so it's maybe the different mindset that we have, because sexual trafficking right now, I could take my microphone out and we'd go out in the street, we could talk to people. Almost everybody would think of kidnapping, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But that's a small percentage. Most of the individuals that are trafficked are actually, in one way or another, in some kind of relationship with the person that's recruiting them into that business.
That's right. We're even hearing now, one of the small snippets in there is about a high school cheerleader who recruits another cheerleader. I mean, this is happening all over the place. And so, yeah, there is a component of relationship usually that's established. And when we get to the kidnapping case, we'll hear about the hardest. But one young girl was at a party and she had a girlfriend with her. The girlfriend that invited her to the party, her 2 brothers had set her up, given her a date rape drug, and then the story goes from there.
Well, let's go on to it, because I wanted to at least have one call that related to the fact that sometimes it's the lover boy or it's the survival sex, but the one that is still not as significant but very devastating is the kidnapping one, and that's every parent's fear. I let my child go to a party, go out on a date, and they don't show up, and I never see them again. And I wonder, how in the world did that happen? So talk about what you found here in some of the kidnapping examples, because that just happens not only overseas, but it happens here, even in the United States.
Certainly does. The story that we have, the larger story in here about kidnapping, is a young girl whose mother was what we called together, the mother and I, a helicopter mom.
Yes.
She was very protective of her child. They lived in a upper middle class neighborhood. All of the things that you wouldn't think would be a factor, which certainly are. It transcends every boundary. And so they'd had this young man over for dinner that night. Literally, her mom goes off to work and says, and by the way, her daughter was just a little bit developmentally slow, and that's certainly something that the pimps and traffickers will prey on.
Yes.
We see a large number with challenges that way. And so this young girl had this young man over for dinner, and they had asked, can we go get a soda? The mom was very protective and said, okay, you can get a soda, but I want you home by 8. And then text me, because I'll be at work, but your dad and the kids will be home. Text me and let me know when you get home. This child goes, and was set up by this young man who had just had dinner at their house. He literally had already orchestrated that a trafficker and some of his buddies would be there to pick her up. And what they did was they said, we're going to go to a party. Do you want to go? Knowing that she would probably say yes because she was a little developmentally slow and all those pieces. She said yes. Date break drug was involved, and then that was it. She literally was kidnapped and held for 8 days until the FBI, and she was, let me back up, Kerby, excuse me. The first trafficker sold her to another trafficker, which in turn gave her to another trafficker. So by this time she's in the same state, but she's hundreds of miles away. Ms. Driven has no idea where she is, and she is being sold on Backpage. She's being sold on the internet, and there are other women who are dressing her, buying clothes for her, now filming her, and she is having to have man after man after man come in the room. And they kept her with sleep medication, with like Tylenol or Sleepies. They continually had her drinking this, so she was somewhat groggy throughout the process until the FBI broke down the door.
It reminds some of our listeners perhaps of the movie Taken, because that's the same premise there.
Right.
Of course, that happens over in France, but the same thing. They sell them and they keep them somewhat drugged and that kind of thing. And again, I think most Americans right now listening to this have to say, and this is happening in the United States? I mean, we expect that to happen maybe in third world countries. We can't even imagine that that's happening here in the United States. But that's what you've been able to find. And you have story after story in each one of these chapters talking about this, whether we're talking about familial trafficking, whether we're talking about survival sex, the lover boy syndrome, or certainly the one that we're talking about here, and that is kidnapping. These stories are just wrenching in terms of what is happening. And so I think it brings us back to what can we do? It seems to me that, first of all, we should support those people that are in our police force that actually believe in this. And that was a challenge, I know, a few years ago of trying to even convince, whether it's those in law enforcement, district attorneys, that this is actually happening. And we need to really have individuals investigate any kind of disappearance of a young person and not just chalk it up to the fact that they're a runaway and they'll show up in a few days.
Well, that's an excellent point about law enforcement needing to know. And let me just preface this with National Center for Missing and Exploited Children have deemed that 1 out of 7 of the case reports of missing children that they receive that are runaway have some component of trafficking in them. And they have actually set up a hotline, 1-800-THE LOST, for parents to report if their child is missing. Because it's very closely knit. If your child's missing and on the street for any capacity for any length of time, we need to recognize their vulnerability to being sexually exploited. So stepping in with that component of reporting missing children is really key. Even if you think they've just run, make sure you report. But about law enforcement, yes, I've noticed a significant change in law enforcement because state laws here in Texas have changed, where now there's a requirement. The Attorney General's office has a task force set up, and even the Trafficking Victim Protection Act requires some law enforcement training. But about a year and a half ago, I had a law enforcement officer come up to me and he said, I didn't believe this until I had a case. And typically, when you come across either a young child or an adult who has been trafficked, they can be difficult. First off, they don't see themselves as a victim and trafficked. They have attitude, and they have all the right answers because they've been told what to say. They say they're 18 and they don't give you their right name, right? So if law enforcement doesn't recognize the flags to look for, they just find it a difficult child who really doesn't want their help anyway, and don't know to press in. But this officer told me, he said, I had some training, and I'm telling you now I'm recognizing it where I didn't before. So it certainly makes a difference.
You know, this book is something that I would encourage a lot of our listeners to get a copy of, but I'm also thinking you might want to give a copy to your pastor, to anybody that is in law enforcement, to educate them about this issue. And one of the things that you have done is if people go to your website, it's justicesociety.org, and we have a link to it as well. If they put in the coupon code POV, stands for point of view, you give them a discount on the book.
That's right.
So again, I would encourage people to go to that website, justicesociety.org. There's a way in which people can certainly find out a lot more about what they can do in their community and sign up and help. But also, if you would like to get a copy of the book, we're going to let everybody go to your website today.
All right.
And if you want a discount, it's a couple of dollars. It'll save you some money. And I would encourage you to then put in the coupon code POV for point of view in order to get a copy of that book. 250 pages, made in the USA, the sex Sex Trafficking of America's Children. If you'd like to know a little bit more, we have an article about the book. We also, of course, have the web link, which I just mentioned, to the Justice Society, but we also have a very nice interview that was done with you in the past, about 29 minutes long. I would encourage you maybe to watch that. You might hit the share button, put it on your Facebook page. That will generate some conversation. Or you might hit a share button on the article page, and that would give you something to talk about and to maybe educate some others about that issue. Come back, we're going to spend a little more time talking about what you can do. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Sex trafficking, our topic for a few more minutes as we talk about the book Made in the USA, The Sex Trafficking of America's Children. Alisa with us a little bit longer. I'll take some more phone calls in just a minute, but I want to give people some action items, some things that they can do. We have lots of motivated people here. They're good at writing letters and sending emails to members of Congress. They're certainly willing to get involved and roll up their sleeves and help. What can the average listener do to help this issue and to deal with this issue of sexual trafficking?
Yeah, well, Kerby, I think my own story is a little bit of a good example of that, is that I had this experience. I didn't know what to do with it, right? And I thought, I have a day job. What can I do? Yeah. And so I called up a local organization that was doing this work. I did my research first, and I found out were they reputable. There's somebody I'd want to work with. And then 2, I really evaluated what kind of time do I have and what capacity do I have? What am I good at and what do I enjoy? I think that when people come and ask me, what can I do? They're looking for me to tell them, do this, this, and this. But the reality is if they're not passionate about doing that, they'll do it for a short period of time and then they'll literally feel a little bit discouraged because they didn't follow it through. So what I encourage people to do, and we have a whole chapter on that in the book, is the folks who have within their own sphere of influence found out what they can do. One gentleman owns a company where they did worked with law enforcement to defraud work, and they started the work that they had done about fraud started tapping into some trafficking cases. I'm not quite sure how that came together, but he said, oh my goodness, I think we can develop this on the side with our business model and then actually help law enforcement, and they did. So that's not his primary means anymore, but he found what he already has, and he just developed a side component that could help around this issue. So what I tell people is, first off, get aware. Know the facts and really take a little bit of time to do research. And I'm not talking about a lot of time, but have some understanding around the issue, and then actively know what to look for. They can do that every day. And I have a couple stories of that, but if you'd like me to share, I will.
Well, you also have a chapter here on identifying and reporting a potential victim.
Yes.
So everybody needs to be involved in that.
Absolutely.
So a lot of great things. Let's take another phone call real quickly. We'll go to South Carolina this time. Debbie, WKCL, what would you like to share with us today?
Hi, my name is Debbie G. Brownfield, and I actually wrote a book called Secret Agendas that deals with human trafficking. Unfortunately, it is a novel, and you can't deal with all of the forms of human trafficking, but in my research, I found out that there are about 8 or 9 ways. And the reason I wrote the book was because I found out it's happening right here in Goose Creek, South Carolina. It's happening everywhere, and people have to know that it's happening in their city, in their little town. So thank you so much for bringing more awareness to this problem, because it just opened my eyes and blew me away when I did the research for the book that I wrote.
Well, I hope you both can communicate off air, because it seems to me that, but here's a good example. I mean, I've been to some of these places in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, a lot of where our listeners are. And I can tell you, these are small towns, and people say, no, not in this town, not in this town. Yeah.
So my publicist got all the information, read the book, and she said, in my small town of Detroit, I just saw a huge article where someone who was relatively prominent within the community unfortunately on radio, he had a program, he was actually purchasing children from a trafficker. It's shocking within their own community. So what I said was, oh my goodness, and this happened right at the time. And she said, I wouldn't have recognized it as trafficking had I not literally the day before read your book, and I could correlate the two. That's what he was doing.
Well, you have a whole section, as I mentioned a minute ago, on identifying and reporting a victim. You also have just a very long list of agencies and resources. So this is such a helpful book. 250 pages of great material. Do we have time maybe for one more phone call?
Sure.
Real quickly, we'll see if we can get Chase in Georgia to join us. Chase, what would you like to share with us real quick?
Just my experience with realizing a couple of years ago that a lot of the young girls that I knew, or that I know, they prostitute, but they seem to be in a trap of they thought there's no reason for them to get out of prostitution, and I myself found this troubling and put to work in reading the Word, and I realized that these are God's people, and they're guaranteed to do this by His Word. He said they will go into this land, and they will play the harlot, they will exploit. He said, my people will do this.
Let me jump in real quickly, because we're a little tight on time. One of the things that I think he was going to talk about is that oftentimes churches aren't providing assistance, but there are ministries that are out there that really help women get out of that, because sometimes they feel caught in that situation. So talk to that issue as well, because sometimes a woman that has been trafficked feels like eventually then she's damaged goods, there's nowhere to go, and if she's still dependent on the financial resources of whoever that might be, the pimp, it's difficult to get them out. So there are ministries that are really dedicated to reaching out to them, aren't there?
They certainly are. It looks different for women than children coming out, because if you're talking about housing, they need housing, they need life skills, job training, all of those pieces. If this is all they've done is worked on the streets. I even had a girlfriend who told me, I invited her over for dinner, and she was in this lifestyle, and she said, I don't even know how to have a conversation with your family. And broke my heart, right? Yeah, and so with it, there are a lot of great organizations, and I will tell you, the church is stepping up. I'm really, really so pleased. And they are finding what needs and what can we do to meet this. But what I would say the area that the church really should continue to look at is in prevention. Because restorative care specifically for children is extremely expensive. It's $8,000 a month per child in the state of California. It's a little less here in the state of Texas, but because there's so much, the counseling, the traumatic care, the medical, the dental, all of those pieces for these kids and women who've been on the street so long. So yes, the church is certainly stepping up into this, but it's a little bit of a pocket group that's doing it, because the mainstream church still really doesn't want to hear about this issue, unfortunately, a lot of times. So,
and you talked about prevention. Sometimes you want to solve the problem upstream, and so we should prosecute those who are engaged in child pornography. We should challenge everyone in our church not to look at pornography. Certainly. It just seems to me that there are just a lot of action items, and you've got a book full of them, and even in an hour, we haven't covered all of them. But just before we close, talk about what people will find when they land at your website, justicesociety.org. And most importantly, we want to mention for our Dallas listeners, you've got this book party coming up. So talk about that.
We do. In October, we're having a party at the top, the upper altitude room in the W, so it's going to be a lot of fun. But what we want to do is we want to make this a celebration of the survivors who were willing to share their stories in this book. And some of the young writers who I solicited to write these stories in the first person. And for a lot of these writers, they said to me, Alisa, this was literally catalytic in my life. It was therapeutic and catalytic. So that's what we're doing. And I encourage anyone who wants to really just support these survivors and have a good time. We're going to laugh, and we're going to have fun, and we're going to celebrate their lives.
Well, again, that's for our Dallas listeners, and you certainly can find out more by going to justicesociety.org. For all of our listeners, if you would like to get a copy of the book, put in the coupon code POV, and you'll get a significant discount from the book. 250 pages, Made in the USA, The Sex Trafficking of America's Children. Alisa, just been delightful to have you on the program. Let's do it again sometime.
Let's do it.
And again, I hope that this has sensitized you to a very significant problem. We have talked about this before, but I think this book gives you a new insight, number one, in all the different ways, as Debbie was talking about just a minute ago, that young people end up into sexual trafficking, and this book covers those and gives you the stories, but also gives you the facts and figures and statistics. So I would encourage you to obtain a copy of the book. Also, go to the article section. That first article there talks about the 5 true stories of American children in sexual trafficking. You might want to click on that share button and put it on your Facebook page. It'll generate all sorts of conversation. You might want to hit the share button, put it on your blog if you have a blog, or send it to somebody that you know.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Today's show is one of the best of Point of View.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, our conversation will focus on debt, in particular consumer debt, as we talk with Mary Hunt. Her book, which has been out for many years, is newly revised. It has just come out, entitled Debt Proof Living, How to Get Out of Debt and Stay That Way. She is a best-selling author, syndicated columnist, motivational speaker. She, of course, has her website, Debt Proof Living, and is the author of a number of books that have won awards, including not only this one, 7 Money Rules for Life, and The Financially Confident Woman. You've perhaps heard her on Focus on the Family. And Mary Hunt, just a delight to have you on the program with us today.
Oh, thank you, Kerby. It's wonderful to be with you.
I noticed in the acknowledgments that you mentioned that it's 20 years ago, hard to believe, the first time you were on with Dr. Jim Dobson back in 1994. Of course, this book came out in 1999, but now it's newly revised, updated. And so a whole new generation of young people, as well as some of us that are a little bit older, can learn some valuable lessons about staying out of debt, or at least getting out of debt and then staying out of debt, right?
That's right. Well, I'm filled with gratitude that the book has lasted that long, and I can hardly believe it's been 20 years. But that's absolutely right. And, this is a topic that needs to be visited often.
I don't write too often on economic issues, but my most recent book, Making the Most of Your Money in Tough Times, was written for 2 reasons. Number one, I came to the conclusion that we as a nation have violated biblical principles concerning money. We are $17 trillion in debt, and we have obligations far beyond that. But number two, that we as individuals have violated biblical principles about money. And so sometimes when people point their finger at government saying you're spending too much, you're spending more than you're taking in, I say, well, recognize that you point that finger, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. And we certainly have a lot of things to cover today as we talk about this issue of debt. But talk about that, why it's important for us to be debt proof, because it seems to me that people struggle with debt, and because of that, there's a lot more stress in their life. You document the fact that it's a good way to protect your marriage because debt is one of the leading cause, if not the leading cause, of marital disruption. So if we can deal with the debt issue, we can deal with a lot of other social problems we're dealing with right now in our society.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's absolutely true. And the more research I do, the more I learn about debt. Some very practical issues, but we have credible evidence now, scientific, empirical evidence, medical evidence that money problems, especially debt, is one of the biggest stressors on a person's health. And, doctors will tell us stress is the leading cause of most diseases and breakdown in health. But it goes on farther than that, Kerby. Now we have evidence that says that the kind of debt you have is going to determine the level of your stress. And credit card debt is the absolute number one top, more so than student debt, more so than economic debt of our nation. It's personal credit card debt that is so stressful and is breaking down not only our marriages, our homes, but our health as well.
I'm going to open up the phones a little bit later and give you a chance to ask some questions about the debt that you have. and maybe get some financial advice from Mary Hunt. Let me also mention that we have under our articles section, What is Debt-Proof Living? A very good piece that appeared on her website. We have an interview that she did, and I would encourage you to watch that video. Then you can click on the share button, maybe put it on your Facebook page, start a conversation. Also, of course, you might want to even put this interview on your page as it is developed under our podcast. And most importantly, we have a link to debtproofliving.com. That's a place where you can see some other videos. You can get a copy of the book and learn a lot more about this. Let's get into the details of debt for just a minute. You early on talk about the difference between two kinds of debt, and that's helpful because I think some people get into the idea that never can you go into debt, but you make a real significant distinction between what we call intelligent borrowing and toxic debt. Mm-hmm. Explain the differences and then to help us figure out how we know which one is which.
Well, it's pretty simple. If the loan involved, the debt that you have involves something of value that the lender can come and repossess if you don't pay it off, then that is called a secured debt. That is what I call intelligent borrowing. That would cover buying a home with a mortgage, perhaps buying a car. Sometimes we can get in trouble with borrowing too much against a car. But anything that has collateral, we can look through life and see all kinds of ways. But I can promise you something, Kerby, that there's no way that the gasoline company can come and repossess gas that you've been putting into your car and putting onto a credit card. Right. So if you just think about that, what's going to happen? What's the consequence if I'm unable to pay? I call that an escape valve. That is a safety measure, because if you get in over your head with a home, perhaps, or you lose your job, or you decide you don't like the house, or you want to move to another area, God's called you to the mission field for any number of reasons you want to get out of that debt, you would be able to turn around, sell that house, pay off a loan, and walk away.
Yes.
Now, the same holds true for the lender. The lender can get out of it because the lender can sell that loan, and they do this all the time. Lenders do this. But there has to be something of value involved called collateral. So that is the benchmark. And people are listening to me right now and going, oh, well, what about student debt? Isn't that a safe debt? Well, technically, no, not by this definition, because no one can come back and take back your education if you change your mind or things just don't work out on the other end. So that would be an unsecured debt. And when it comes to unsecured debt, they come in many flavors. There may become some that marginal, borrowing a bit, maybe on a student loan. If you know that you are going to be accepted into that field of work, you'll be able to have a job, pay it back. That's something to consider very carefully. I'm not a big proponent of student debt, but I'll tell you something. Unsecured, runaway credit card debt is the real killer in all of this.
Certainly is. Just before we leave that for a minute, I might just mention that many of you know that I do a 2-minute commentary. A lot of you receive it in your inbox. Many of you hear it not only on the stations that carry this broadcast, but many other stations do not carry Point of View. And on July 30th, I did a commentary on student loans. Now, Mary, I was looking at it more from the political point of view and the fact that now we're seeing more and more people pushing for students to get higher and higher amounts of student loan debt, when they really have no reasonable expectation of being able to pay it off. And now with the pay-as-you-earn program, I think we're going to leave a lot of taxpayers holding the bill there. But I thought it was interesting that you brought up the issue of student loans. So even though we tend to speak a lot to some of the political issues, you can see how those interface, obviously, with some of the chapters in your book. But let's take a break. When we come back, we want to spend some time with Mary Hunt. She does such a great job of communicating this. This book has been out for many years, but it's newly revised. It is just out, 300 pages. And if you are in debt, you know somebody who's in debt, this is going to be very helpful to you. We're also going to talk about what kind of debt should you take on maybe as an organization. That could be a church, could be a Christian organization, and some other things, and certainly what is important to understand on some of these issues. But we're going to come back, first of all, and talk about consumer debt. What about those credit cards in your wallet or your pocketbook? How about some of the situations that you find yourself in? How can you break out of the debt trap? Those are conversations we're going to have in just a few minutes with Mary Hunt. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, as we talk about her book, Debt Proof Living. We'll be back with more right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is a Muslim and president of Egypt. He grew up in the midst of the Muslim world and in the world's center of Sharia scholarship. So when he called for a religious revolution within Islam, his words had great significance. In a speech at Cairo's premier center of religious learning, he called for a change and revolution. He argued that Islam is in need of a religious revolution. You imams are responsible before Allah. The entire world is waiting on you. The entire world is waiting on your word because the Islamic world is being torn. It is being destroyed. It is being lost. He went on to add, we need a revolution of the self, a revolution of consciousness and ethics to rebuild the Egyptian person, a person that our country will need in the near future. Columnist George Will lauded al-Sisi for his bravery. He said that as the head of the Egyptian state, al-Sisi occupies an office once occupied by Anwar Sadat, who was murdered by Islamic extremists for his opening to Israel. This was an act of tremendous bravery by al-Sisi, and if the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is looking for someone who plausibly deserves it, they could start here. President al-Sisi is right that Islam is in need of a religious revolution, but it is hard to see how that will happen in the Muslim world where more and more Arab countries are run by, or else threatened by, radical elements within Islam. And it's hard to see how Europe and America will help when the leaders of most of these countries are afraid to even talk about radical Muslim terrorism. You know, President al-Sisi is now calling for other Arab countries to join forces to battle ISIS. On a recent televised speech, he said the need for a unified Arab force is growing and becoming more pressing every day. He is one Arab leader who understands the problem within Islam and is calling for other Muslims to join together and fight ISIS. He deserves our support. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have Mary Hunt with us today as we talk about her book, Debt-Proof Living, How to Get Out of Debt and Stay That Way. And Mary, just for our younger listeners, let's put this in perspective. Your book came out 15 years ago, December of 1999. You talk about the median family income at that time, and then you decided after a number of years to rewrite it and to change a few things in 2005. And things were looking a little bit better, but then we have the crash again of 2008. Consumer debt has gone up dramatically. And in these 15 years, whether we look at the federal government and its accumulated debt or individual consumer debt, this is why you felt that really this whole new generation needs to relearn, and maybe some of them learn for the very first time some of these important principles that will, in a sense, guarantee that they will have a better life in the future if they follow them, and also guarantee that they'll have a very difficult time if they ignore them.
You know, absolutely. And the thing that was so startling to me is how much things have changed in the past 15 years, but on the other hand, so much has stayed the same. Kerby, we've been through all kinds of cycles since then.
Yes.
Great economy. We hit the skids with the Great Recession in 2008. But you know what? I have discovered that it doesn't matter. People are still prone to spending and living beyond their means. During good times, during boom times, when jobs are plentiful and houses are going up in value so quickly, people look at this and think, wow, it's never going to end. I'll get it all now and just pay it off later. I'll enjoy things now. But then when things start to go down, they're worried. I don't have enough money to pay for everything. I'll put everything on credit now and pay for it later when things get better. So that's a lesson we need to learn. The temptation is always there, and the solution will never change. It's always going to be the same.
Well, and one of the things you talk about is keeping records. You talk about a daily spending record, a monthly spending record. And I've even talked to individuals that have worked in catalog companies, and they recognize that after a person maybe even declares bankruptcy or there has been a major collapse, for a while, people stop spending. But you just wait about 30 days, 60 days, at the most 90 days, and they're just back to their spending habits. So it really isn't that you don't have enough income. It's that we have a habit, especially in this consumerist society, of spending, and that seems to be almost unaffected by the amount of income that we have.
That's absolutely true, because we have been taught, and I say that cautiously, but I think it's true, that the whole consumer credit industry that right now is about 45 years old. That's not old when you look at the whole scheme of history and all. Before that, no one in their right mind would have taken a mortgage on their home to take the kids to Disney World for a vacation, or taken out or refinanced their house and taken out a mortgage to pay for their daughter's wedding. I mean, that kind of thing would have never, ever been thought of. But along came that industry that started telling us, go ahead and spend all you have. If you have emergencies, we will be there for you. That's why you need a credit card. That is why you need Visa and MasterCard. And as a society, we have believed that. I mean, most people, when they look back and say, why did they get that first credit card? It was to have in case of emergency. And so many people think of that as a noble, honorable, responsible, financially confident way to approach their life and their family, to have credit there just in case of emergency. And I say that is at the basis of the whole problem.
Sure.
Because that has taught us we can spend it all and not worry about what's going to happen.
Well, again, just having flown just recently, just imagine trying to get on an airplane without a credit card. Imagine trying to rent a car without a credit card. And so there are so many places where we say it is absolutely essential that you have one. Of course, also justifying that you might need it in an emergency. And for all of our kids that we send off to college, they're just inundated with the credit card applications and opportunities. It doesn't take long for a person that doesn't know how to say no and doesn't think through the implications of those actions to get themselves in a very difficult situation in terms of debt.
Absolutely. What you say is so key, and I'm so glad you brought this up. Because, Kerby, I believe that credit is not evil. Having a credit card to do as you say, to fly, to rent a car, those kinds of things, that is not evil. That is a tool. That is a modern tool, like a chainsaw, or I'm thinking of other things in our lives that are powerful and give us a lot of ability to get jobs done. But if we abuse them, you can cut your leg off. And that's the problem. The problem is the credit card debt. It is the result of abusing of a credit card, and I had to learn the hard way. Boy, did I ever. That debt rolling from one month to the next on a credit card should be the biggest red flag in the world. You're headed for so much trouble. You're headed for the debt trap. If you can't pay that off in a single month, you need to stop using plastic. You can't be trusted with it. We've got to get you some financial maturity, some financial intelligence here, which is easy to learn, and you will come to that point where you'll be able to have one of these tools in your life. But that's the problem, is the debt. That's the killer.
Mary, you just mentioned in passing, and for some of our listeners that are not familiar with your story, maybe you can shorten it and maybe tell a little bit, because you're a fellow traveler. It's not like you've come here with never having had a problem with the issue of debt.
That's right. And in fact, there was a time in my life, if anyone would have ever told me that I would, admit to it, let alone be on a national show such as yours, I would probably died of a heart attack. But yeah, I got into terrible, terrible trouble, Kerby. The first 12 years of my marriage, I just went crazy. I was that consumer credit perfect client, I was the customer they were all looking for, and I believed everything they said, that the more credit I used, the better I was, the more credit history I was building, and they would send me more credit cards and more credit limits, and I figured, well, they must know something I don't know. And I saw the total of my husband and my credit limits on our credit cards as, I can't hardly bring myself to say this, but it's true. An extension of his income. He was the breadwinner. His income was X amount. It was an excellent, very respectable income. I saw the total of our credit limits as the extension of that bridged the gap between what he earned and what I needed for him to earn to have the lifestyle I wanted. And I'll tell you something, that's like getting on one of those hamster wheels. You get going faster and faster, and you just can't get off. Well, at the end of 12 years, we had brought 2 little boys into our lives. Our family had grown, and so had my propensity to spend way beyond our ability to pay. And I ran up, by the time I came to the end of the road, I had run up more than $100,000 of credit card debt. Now, this was back in 1982, many years ago. So if we apply, just inflation and the way things change, we know that $100,000 now would be much less. I mean, we're looking at probably equivalent of maybe even $250,000 in buying power, in the ability to pay it back. It's shocking to me. I can hardly get the words out. But that's what happened, and my life fell apart.
Yeah,
absolutely. I wish I could say I woke up and came to the end of myself and, I think I'm going to change. No, I nearly lost everything. Nearly lost my home, my husband, my kids, everything. And I had a real turning point, a major spiritual experience when I had to come to the realization that, I was raised in a pastor's family. I knew everything in my head about what God's Word says about managing money and stewardship and what God expects of us. It had never invaded my life, and it had to come to that place where I was out of resources, out of ideas, out of new schemes and scams to keep going on, that I had to realize it wasn't my husband's low-paying job. It wasn't the fact that I didn't get a big inheritance or that I wasn't raised into a very rich family. It was me. It was me. It was the ugly, dark side of me that had brought me to this place, and I had to fall on my face before God and ask for forgiveness. And it was at that point that I promised God I would do anything to pay back the debt. Now, I didn't know how much it was. When you're in that kind of place, you're not coming home every night and adding it up. And, honey, we just passed 90,000. I was in such denial. Our family was in such a terrible situation. But I made that promise, and I asked God for forgiveness, and of course, He always forgives, always another chance. But I meant it more than anything in my life, and I said I would do anything to pay it back, and that's a powerful promise. Now, I won't say that God just dropped $100,000 onto my lap and said, "Here, girl, I believe you, pay it off, go on, be happy." No, it was a long journey back, 13 years to pay that debt. But let me tell you something, it was joyful. As I look and recount the opportunities that God gave me to earn money, to work harder than I've ever worked in my life, but it was a change. And getting into debt should have been the fun part. It wasn't. That was the stinking, horrible, stressful. Getting out, coming back, taking that journey, hoping that I could get to the finish line so that no one would ever have to know, because it was 13 years of secrecy. My husband and I only were the ones who knew what had happened and what we were doing.
Very good.
It was so shameful, but that's what happened. And out of that has come this organization, Debt Proof Living, the opportunity to lead so many people out of debt. I just can't tell you how grateful I am.
Well, we're grateful that you're with us. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we already have phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
We're privileged to have with us today Mary Hunt. Her book is entitled Debt Proof Living, How to Get Out of Debt and Stay That Way. And I'm glad that she shared her story because, as I said, she's a fellow traveler. I can remember over the years here on Point of View, and we'd have in the old days Larry Burkett or Chuck Bentley, or more recently James Paris or Jerry Tuma. Somebody call in and they'd say, I probably have $30,000 in credit card debt, and everybody would sort of just be shocked. Mary, when you talk about $100,000 in debt in 1982, that's back when $100,000 was worth $100,000, really worth almost $250,000 now. It illustrates that you have been there, so you have a great deal of empathy and understanding and have put together a book of almost 300 pages that really helps address the problem and the solution and the way in which listeners who find themselves in debt that they are convinced they will never be able to climb out of. There is hope indeed, is there not?
There is. There absolutely is. And let me say, Kerby, that if I would have known then what I know now, we would have been out of debt in 5 years.
Yes.
So I want people to realize that those numbers sound so awful. But, you know, the time's going to pass anyway. 5 years from now, you'll still be 5 years older, and you'll either still be in debt or you won't be. So you might as well do something about it, and I can help you do that.
Yes, well, and again, you have this rapid debt repayment plan, and let's bring a caller on because I think maybe you can help that caller actually learn how to do this and how to break out of the debt trap. We'll go to Lucy first in Georgia. Lucy, you're on with Mary Hunt.
Hello, Miss Mary Hunt. How are you?
Good, Lucy. Nice to talk with you.
Same here. This may be for me an answer to a lot of prayer, but I heard your story, and it's my story, and it just impacted me, and I called right away. I'm in $40,000 in debt. My husband has still a good job. However, we're going through a separation, and he has completely not helping me financially. So now I don't have a job. I'm a stay-at-home mom. And now I have the creditors calling, and I'm at a point that I can't pay my debt. I'm behind, and it seems like a no way out, and I'm just numb. I just don't really know what to do from here. And so I wanted to see if you had an advice, what I can do, what step can I take.
Wow, Lucy, you're in a tough position. Have you lost your income? I mean, you have no income now, just what, child support or?
No, because we're not divorced. We're separated, and but he just completely, he's still supporting the home, but he's not helping me.
Let me ask you something, Lucy, just between the two of us. How much do you think that this money problem has contributed to the problem between you and your husband?
Well, I believe it's a lot to do with it. A lot to do with it. It's definitely a result of that, and it is. It's in disobedience and living above my means, and I guess trying to justify a life that I wanted to have, that I felt that I was entitled. But and this is the result.
Yeah. You've got to understand that on a show like this, it's just so very, very difficult for us to, get too far. But I would just love for you and your husband. Will he talk to you about it? Will he sit down and will he listen to you, pour out your heart? I mean, there's going to have to come a point when you put down all of the, the justifications and all of that and the blaming and all, and take responsibility. We've messed up. We have to get control of the money here. We don't trust each other. I bet you anything that both of you have lost trust in the other. And that will break down anything. I've written about this a great deal, Lucy. I'm going to give you a website I would like for you to visit. It's not my site. I would like you to find out if you could benefit from some good credit counseling. There aren't a lot of good ones out there. There's a lot of scam artists. But go to N, that's in Nancy, F as in Fred, cc.org. That stands for National Federation for Credit Counseling. This is a good organization. It's not a Bible-based, but I don't think that you're going to find anything there that would be objectionable at all. These people can really, really take a look at your situation and offer you help without charging a lot of money. I'd love for you to do that. But beyond that, I'd love for you to read my book. Come and become a member at Debt Proof Living. You can communicate with me. I can give you some other resources. My heart is hurting for you because I know you're in a really, really difficult position.
Let's, if we can, encourage all of our listeners to find out a little bit more about Debt Proof Living, and it's debtproofliving.com. Of course, we have a link to it as well. They can get an autographed copy of your book. They can watch a video. They can join with you. But talk about some of the resources that are available to some of our listeners.
Well, we just have so much. We offer webinars, absolutely free, hour-long webinars. People can come and join in and get an idea, an overview for what Debt Proof Living is all about. All it is it's a money management system, 5 core elements that we put into place, just like pieces in a puzzle. Every person needs to have each one of these in their life in order to start managing their money. It's a way to get started. Debt Proof Living at our site, we have the monthly newsletters that I've written all the way back to 1997 right there online. So we've got tremendous information of forums of people who are in the same situation, a lot of encouragement, and especially a great deal of hope.
You talked about how if you knew what you knew now, you'd be able to have paid off your debt faster. And that gets us into at least a little bit of help for all of our listeners, the Rapid Debt Repayment Plan. You even have a calculator. There's just some basics that we've talked about before, but you have put it in such an understandable way. Talk to somebody right now that maybe has $20,000 in credit card debt, $30,000 in debt, and they are saying, well, I have 5 creditors here, mom and dad, a credit union, maybe a MasterCard bill, maybe Sally Mae, whatever it might be. How do they get themselves out faster according to your plan?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take off my let's just be buddies kind of attitude here, and we're going to hit this straight on. You, my friend, not you, Kerby, you, my friend, have to stop putting any more purchases on those credit cards.
Yes.
You cannot go one nickel further into this hole, or no one will ever be able to help you. So that's the absolute first rule of the Rapid Debt Repayment Plan. You have to stop adding to the problem. Secondly, we're going to take your debts, and we're going to use the exact payments you're making right now, the same minimum monthly payments right now. If you can make them this month, I'm going to assume you're going to do this every month until you're out of debt. So now that what we're doing there is we are establishing a base. And even if those payments go down in the future because the balances are dropping, we're going to ignore that. Next, the plan takes your debts and lines them up in order of that they will pay off, which is going to put the smallest one at the top. Now, I know a lot of people go, well, we need to put the biggest interest rate at the top. You know what? I've tried this. I've been here, folks. That may not work if that's your biggest debt. We're emotional beings. We need to have a payoff as quickly as possible. So we put the smallest one at the top. We're going to pay it off. Then we're going to take its payment, add it to the next debt in line, and now that second debt is going to get paid quicker. Even though you're not actually paying more out of pocket every month, you're still paying the same amount every single month. This is going to it's going to turn it into a paying off machine that's going to get you out of debt very, very quickly. You'll have a written plan. The calculator on our website for our members is going to make your plan for you. Print it right out, put it on the refrigerator. You'll see exactly the day that you're going to be debt-free. Now, let me tell you something. Back in 1982, if I would have known this, if I would have been able to see that it could happen, I think it would have shot me to the moon. Because as it was, we were blind. My husband had been in the banking business. Of all people, you'd think we should have had the best kind of consumer information.
Yes.
We were ignorant. We were walking blind. But I'll tell you something, as long as you're headed in the right direction, even the baby steps count, and even when you fall flat on your face, you're still going in the same direction. You just got to get up and keep going. But using the Rapid Debt Repayment Plan, honestly, I hear from people who have been able to get out of debt in 24 months, 36 months, even 48. So what if it takes 4 years? If you keep going the way you're going now, it's going to be 48 years, or you may never be able to get out of debt.
Again, I love the way in which you use the benefit from one to the next, so it's sort of a cascading effect that actually gives you a sense of encouragement and success and progress. So very, very helpful. Let's take a break. I know some also want to talk about debt. What about bankruptcy? All sorts of issues. So we certainly have a few more things to cover real quickly with Mary Hunt, but we're not possibly going to cover a 300-page book in 1 hour, but we're certainly exposing you to not only her book, but her website and the resources that are available to you. So go to our website today. We have an interview that she has done. We have information about the book. We have a link to her website, and we encourage you to find out more about debt-proof living, the book, as well as the website. We'll be back with more right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Mary Hart with us as we talk about debt-proof living. Let's go out to the state of California, KYCC. Barbara, thank you for joining our conversation today.
You're welcome. Thank you for taking my call. We had started a business, a trucking business, in 2008, and the timing was rather poor because at the time with fuel it was like $1.99 a gallon, and in the meantime the state passed new laws with the EPA, so we ended up having to choosing to get a new truck rather than going out of business. Anyhow, long story short, in 2011, my husband had an opportunity to go to work for a company where we'd have benefits and everything, and he's now 60 and thought that would be good. So we sold the company, and the money that we had put aside where we were going to negotiate the business debt. Come to find out, we made a profit that year and owed taxes. So we ended up doing an offer and compromise. We still have the company debt plus credit card debt that we had obtained by when we weren't getting paid for the hauls we were doing and needed fuel. I took out, money on the credit card. So now we're facing bankruptcy, and that's pretty well it.
Mary, any thoughts?
Well, boy, this is just so hard. My heart goes out to you. I can hear the pain in your voice. It's just another example of us making an assumption on the future. And I think that's behind a lot of the things that we do. It looks to me like you have mixed business with your own personal kind of thing. I would suggest to you, as I did to a previous caller, that you would be a great candidate to get some personal credit counseling from someone you can really trust, who will look at your situation and be honest with you and say, look, this you need to go see an attorney. You need to go through this bankruptcy on the business end of your deal. Let's separate out your personal debt here. I don't know if that can be done, but I would certainly recommend that you reach out and get some help from, qualified, trustworthy organization like nfcc.org. That would be a place to start. You can go to their website. It's all very confidential. I think that you can trust them in that way. As far as what you're doing right now, is your husband employed now?
Yes, he is. And when he took this job, we had figured what debt we still had, and it seemed to pencil out, but there was things that we didn't figure in. And obviously we don't use credit cards anymore. We've stopped doing that. We did see an attorney, but now it's a matter of coming up with the money to even file bankruptcy. It's just been kind of weird. I'm a realtor, and it seems like the faucet's been shut off for me too. So I don't know if God's trying to direct me one way or the other, or if I'm under attack. But anyhow, Well, I can assure you that God is directing you. He has not abandoned you. You don't ever have to wonder. And the thing is that it's trusting and having that faith and asking Him to show you exactly. So, oh my goodness, I'm going to pray for you that you will be able to see exactly the way God is guiding, and that He will open up opportunities for you to be able to speak to people and get good, solid counsel. You may have a few years ahead of you of tremendous sacrifice, where you work and sell houses. They're selling like crazy here in California right now. And God's going to give you those opportunities. I can't tell you that He's going to erase your debt. I don't know if that would be the best thing for you. So much we have to learn from all of this. But I have it on good authority that God is not leaving you. He is there to take and to guide you every single step of the way. And I would just encourage you to get some real good counseling. Okay. I'll do that, and the prayers will help too, most definitely.
Well, God bless you.
Thank you. You too, and thank you for your help.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we'll even encourage our listening audience to pray for Barbara. And let's real quickly, see if we can go out to South Carolina real quickly and talk to George. George, you're on with Mary Hunt.
Hey, how y'all doing today?
Very good. Do you have a short story you can share with us real quick?
Yeah, I got a short story. Well, I've been in debt. I've been in over $50,000 worth of debt, probably because I was, traveling the world, and I was in the Marine Corps going back and forth, and that collects up really quick. One thing that I found out that a lot of people won't do is they won't show the initiative to go out and get work, get one or two jobs, part-time jobs, and that helps out.
It certainly does, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want people to know. We can work a lot harder than we ever thought, and we have to realize that working a second job, you cannot allow that to increase your expenses.
No.
You've got to get very, very creative, and one thing that I began doing all those years ago, I'm kind of embarrassed to say it, but don't tell anyone. I sat down and decided that I was never going to pay anybody again to do things I could do for myself. You can't believe I learned how to do yard work, and we didn't have a pool, but if we had, you can be sure I would have learned how to clean it. And we're talking shoveling snow, and we're talking about manicures and pedicures, and don't tell anybody, but I actually cut my own hair, and I still do to this day because I realized that I was paying so many other people to do things that I could do for myself and my husband and my kids. And we live a nice life. We have nice things. We're not frumpy. I want people to realize this. There's so many ways you can cut down your expenses if you're just willing to try, willing to work harder than you've ever worked in your life, and to keep moving forward.
Debt-proof living is a plan that equips you for the best ways to get out of debt, a way of life that allows you to live below your means, and a simple approach on how to save, give, and pay off credit card debt. So as people go to your website, you have sections on debt repayment, spending plan, a contingency fund, a freedom account. You have forums, a way in which people can build community. Talk, if you would, just for a minute, Mary, about what people will find when they land on your website.
Right. I want people to understand that Debt Proof Living is a membership website. There is a membership fee to have benefit and access to all of these things. That's why I would really like for anyone who's interested, be cautious. You should be very careful. Know what you're looking at here. Attend one of my webinars. It's an hour-long overview. They're live. All you need is your computer. You can sign up for it right there at the website. In the meantime, I would invite people to come to my blog, which is absolutely free. It's everydaycheapskate.com. And if you sign up, I'll be in your inbox every single morning to help you stay on the frugal path, encourage you in every way possible, talking about all of these things, about how to get out of debt. And we have tremendous, reader interaction. We have a very active Facebook site as well. You can find us there at Debt Proof Living, Facebook Debt Proof Living. So many resources, but I want people to know that the website itself is membership, and it's very reasonable. It's $39 for a whole year. I have discovered over the years, not only about myself, but about most people, is we don't value things that come for free. We don't give them a great deal of value. This is serious business, getting out of debt, learning how to manage money, changing our lives so we're living below our means. That's why I'm not ashamed at all to say this is a committed group of people, thousands and thousands of people on this same journey. We're encouraging each other. We're holding each other accountable in a membership kind of situation, not open to the public.
Well, again, it gets back to one of my themes, and that is sometimes people say, what can I do? It's a pronoun problem. What can we do? And community is certainly one way to do that. But one of the first steps is, of course, to find out more about the book. We have information about it, Debt Proof Living, How to Get Out of Debt and Stay That Way. It's been in print for many years, 15 years, but this new edition is one that I think you'll want to get a copy of. And Mary Hunt, we followed your career, and it's just been a blessing to have you on the program today.
Thank you so much, Kerby. The hour just flew by, didn't it?
Yes, fastest hour in radio. So we're going to take a break and come back to some other issues in the future. Mary Hunt with us today. Again, Debt Proof Living, How to Get Out of Debt and Stay That Way. You can find out more at her website. You might even be able to find that book in your local Christian bookstore as well, and we encourage you to do so.
Why does Kerby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy, but by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly.